The suitcase hit the marble floor with a crack loud enough to make 3 servants flinch and one very expensive vase wobble like it was reconsidering its life choices. 3 days, Min-jae said, not even looking up from the folder in his hands. Isabella blinked at him. Excuse me? You can stay for 3 days. I'm sorry, I think the wedding officiant said, till death do us part, not 3 business days, subject to renewal. Terms and conditions apply. That was for the cameras. Oh, so the vows were fake, but the ring is real? Interesting economy you're running here. Very selective honesty. I respect the confidence. I fear the ethics. Min-jae finally looked up. He had the face of a man who had never once in his life lost an argument, which meant he had clearly never met Isabella and was, frankly, about to have a very educational week. You're my wife. On paper. For business reasons. That doesn't mean you live here indefinitely. Then why, Isabella said, stepping over her suitcase and directly into his personal space, arms crossed, did your grandmother personally walk me to this house and tell the staff to prepare the East Wing? The good East Wing, Min-jae, the one with the walk-in closet the size of my entire studio apartment back home, complete with what I am fairly sure was a chandelier just for the closet, a light fixture whose sole job is to illuminate my shoes? She likes theater. She likes theater, Isabella repeated, nodding slowly like she was filing that away in a case folder labeled Suspicious Behavior, Exhibit 1. Min-jae. I flew across an ocean. I wore a dress that weighed more than your ego, which, respectfully, is saying something. I smiled at 400 strangers who kept whispering about me in Korean, like I couldn't feel the vibe even if I couldn't catch the words. I am not spending 3 days in a mansion just to get shipped back like a bad Amazon return with a note that says, wrong size, please advise. You're being dramatic. I'm being accurate. There's a difference, and you're going to learn it before this week is out, possibly against your will. Somewhere behind them, a maid pretending very hard to dust a vase that had already been dusted twice that morning was recording every second of this exchange into her memory for the staff group chat, which, unbeknownst to either of them, was already 300 messages deep and trending toward a poll titled, How Many Days Does She Actually Last? Min-jae set the folder down on the hallway table with the exact, controlled precision of a man defusing a bomb he'd built himself and was now regretting. There are rules in this house. There are always rules in these houses. Go on. I love a list. Read it to me like a bedtime story. No loud music. Devastating. I'll grieve privately. No eating in the living room. Where else would food go, Min-jae? The garage? Are we eating suya next to your Bentley? Because, honestly, that sounds like a great date night. I'm open to it. There is no Bentley. Then what's under the tarp in the garage, a body? He didn't answer that fast enough for her liking. Filed away. Case folder growing. No touch in my office, Min-jae continued, undeterred. Wasn't planning on it. What's in there? Another body? Isabella. That's 2 body-adjacent silences in 90 seconds. I want you to know I'm keeping count. And no rearranging furniture, he finished, with the weary air of a man who suspected, correctly, that this rule had already been broken in spirit, if not yet in physical fact. Noted. Isabella picked up her suitcase, walked directly past him into the sitting room, and moved the armchair 4 inches to the left with the calm, unbothered energy of a woman relocating a throw pillow. What are you doing? Testing the rules. Structural integrity check. Basic due diligence. The chair looks better here, and also the couch is currently facing away from the only window in this entire room, which is a crime against sunlight and possibly against God. Isabella. She hit play on her phone. Afrobeat filled the marble hallway at a volume clearly designed for a much bigger room, or possibly a much bigger act of rebellion, and within 4 bars a member of the household staff 2 rooms away was visibly nodding along despite himself. Rule 1 broken, she announced over the music, already peeling an orange as she wandered toward the kitchen. Rule 2 is happening right now since I intend to eat this in your pristine, museum-adjacent living room. Rule 3 is next. I'm just building momentum. Think of me as a very small, very determined hurricane. You cannot just dismantle my household in the first 10 minutes. Watch me. I've had worse odds. I once talked my way past airport security with an expired passport and a smile. Min-jae, house rules are not the tallest wall I've climbed this year. Min-jae stood in the hallway, jaw tight, watching 4 of his 4 house rules dissolve in under 2 minutes by a woman he had known officially for 6 hours and unofficially for exactly 0, and something in his expression, buried very deep, very reluctant, looked almost like it wanted to laugh. "You are the most chaotic person I have ever met," he said finally. "Thank you," Isabella said through a mouthful of orange, dropping the peel directly onto a side table that looked like it cost more than her childhood home, purely as a matter of principle. "I try very hard." That wasn't a compliment. "I know. I'm choosing to receive it as one. That's called emotional resilience. Look it up, I'll wait." He actually laughed then, one clipped, startled sound, gone as fast as it arrived, like his own face wasn't entirely sure it had permission to do that anymore. Isabella noticed. Filed that away too, right next to the 2 body-adjacent silences. There wasn't much time to enjoy the small victory, though, because a housekeeper appeared at the end of the hallway at a near jog, clutching a garment bag like it might detonate.
"Sir."
"Madam, the family dinner. Tonight. Everyone is coming, your aunt, your cousins, the elders. They want to meet her." Min-jae's face changed so fast Isabella nearly missed it, confidence cracking at the edges the way ice cracks right before it gives entirely. "Tonight," he repeated. "Yes, sir." They moved it up. It was supposed to be in 2 weeks. "Yes, sir," they said. The housekeeper hesitated, clearly weighing her own survival against her duty to relay information. They said they wanted to see her before she got comfortable. "Excuse me," Isabella said, orange peel frozen mid-drop. "Before I got what now? I have been comfortable since the moment I broke Rule 1. Comfort is my whole brand. Tell them they're 14 days too late." Min-jae straightened his jacket, and just like that the crack sealed itself back up, professional mask fully restored, though not before Isabella caught the flicker of genuine dread underneath it. "Because my family doesn't do dinners," he said grimly. "They do interrogations. With dessert." "Oh, good," Isabella said, dropping the orange peel squarely onto his precious side table for the 3rd and final time. "I love dessert. Bring on the elders. I've survived worse aunties than whatever they've got lined up, and I mean that as a genuine, hard-won boast." By the time they reached the dining hall that evening, Isabella had changed into something that made 3 cousins whisper and 1 aunt actively choke on her wine, and Min-jae had gone from mildly composed to a man walking toward his own execution in an extremely well-tailored suit. The table was long enough to require a shuttle service between courses. Every seat was occupied by a relative with an opinion and the confidence to share it entirely uninvited, and Isabella had barely sat down before the first volley landed. "So," the aunt at the head of the table said, not even waiting for the soup, "you're the one from Nigeria." "I'm the one from Nigeria," Isabella agreed pleasantly, smiling with all her teeth. "And you're the one who's been staring at my dress since I walked in like it personally insulted your ancestors." "It's a dress, ma'am, not a declaration of war. Although I am, generally speaking, open to that too, depending on how the evening goes." Silence. A cousin dropped a fork with a clatter that echoed like a gunshot. "I only meant," the aunt recovered, visibly recalibrating, "that it's very bold. It's rayon and confidence mostly." Min-jae, beside her, pressed 2 fingers to his temple like a man already mourning every decision that had led him to this exact chair. "Isabella." "What?" "I'm being polite. You should hear what I sound like when I'm not being polite. I promise you this table would need therapy. I would genuinely fear for this family's collective well-being. As you should. It builds character."
The soup arrived.
The interrogation, undeterred by soup, continued at pace. "Tell us," a cousin chimed in, leaning forward with the particular delight of someone who lived exclusively for other people's discomfort. "How exactly did you 2 meet? Because the story going around is interesting." "Business arrangement," Min-jae said flatly. At the precise same moment Isabella said, "Love at first argument," and for one glorious second the entire table looked like it had short-circuited. "It was both," Isabella amended smoothly, patting Min-jae's hand like she was soothing a startled horse. We argued about a business arrangement and fell in love somewhere around insult number 4. Efficient. 2 birds, 1 very expensive stone. What insult was it? Another cousin asked, delighted, leaning in further. Specifically, he called my suitcase excessive. I called his personality a rounding error. It escalated from there in a way I can only describe as romantic if you squint very hard and also possibly need glasses. A round of stifled laughter rippled down the table before several relatives visibly remembered they weren't supposed to enjoy this and reset their faces into something more appropriately suspicious. Min-jae stared at her like she'd just performed a magic trick he hadn't authorized and wasn't sure he was allowed to applaud. A rounding error, he repeated under his breath. You're welcome. I could have said worse. I had worse ready. I don't doubt that for a second. Then, mid-spoonful of soup, everything changed. Min-jae set his spoon down.
Slowly.
Deliberately. His shoulders, which had been rigid all evening, dropped an inch, then 2. His whole posture loosened, like a marionette whose strings had just been handed off to someone entirely new, someone with much looser wrists and much less patience for tariffs. Why, he said, in a voice that still sounded like him but carried itself completely differently now, lighter, faster, bouncing with barely contained mischief. Is everyone dressed like they're attending a funeral? Genuinely. Look around this table. Somebody died, and nobody told me. Is it me? Did I die? That would explain a lot. Honestly, it's the most interesting thing that's happened to me all week. The table froze mid-chew. Isabella stared. What? The man who used to be Min-jae, or the man currently wearing Min-jae's face? She genuinely could not tell anymore, and was rapidly deciding she needed a scorecard, grinned wide and unbothered, and reached across the table for the bread basket like he hadn't just derailed an entire family interrogation in real time. I'm June, he said, extending a hand across the table like they hadn't been legally married for 6 hours already. Nice to finally meet the wife. He's been unbearable about you all week and he doesn't even know it yet, which honestly is the funniest part of my whole day. June, Isabella repeated slowly, shaking his hand out of sheer stunned reflex, orange peel confidence briefly abandoning her. That's me. In the flesh. His flesh, technically, but details. And Min-jae is taking a little break. He does that sometimes. Don't worry, he always comes back for dessert. The man has priorities even in crisis. It's actually kind of admirable. June turned to the table at large, entirely at ease in a way Min-jae had never once managed in Isabella's presence.
So,
since we're all here and nobody's said anything interesting in 40 minutes, who wants to hear the story about the time Min-jae got locked out of his own office because he forgot the door code was his own birthday? A man who remembers 17 quarterly earnings reports by heart could not, for the life of him, remember the day he was born. June, the aunt at the head of the table said sharply, in the exact tone of a woman trying to smother a fire with a teacup of water and losing. That's enough. Or, June continued, undeterred, warming up like a man who had been saving material for exactly this occasion, the time he cried during a cereal commercial and told everyone it was allergies. In November. Indoors. There was no pollen for 400 miles, and I checked. I have receipts. I keep receipts on everyone in this family for exactly this kind of moment. 2 cousins burst out laughing before they could stop themselves, one of them nearly inhaling a spoonful of soup in the process. The aunt looked like she wanted to physically disappear into the tablecloth and take the rest of the evening with her. Isabella, for her part, had gone from stunned to fully delighted in record time, leaning in with both elbows on the table like she'd just found the best seat in a theater. Oh, I like you. I like you a lot.
Keep going.
Do you have more? Please tell me you have more. I've been starving for content since I got off the plane. Do I have more? June said, aghast, pressing a hand to his chest like she'd questioned his entire life's work. Isabella. I have a filing cabinet. I have an archive. I have. June. The aunt's voice cracked like a whip this time, cutting clean through the table's laughter, sharper and colder than anything she'd said all evening. That is enough. June's grin didn't disappear exactly, but it dimmed fast, like someone had turned a dial down on him without asking permission first. I wasn't even going to say the good one. Enough, the aunt repeated, quieter now, but somehow far more final than the first time, and something in the way she said it made three separate relatives suddenly find their napkins extremely interesting. The room went very still. A cousin cleared his throat. Someone refilled a water glass that didn't need refilling. Conversation limped back to life in careful, deliberate little fragments. The weather, a cousin's new car, absolutely anything except whatever had almost been said 2 sentences ago. Isabella noticed. Isabella always noticed. But she also noticed, with the finely tuned instincts of a woman who had grown up reading rooms full of aunties for a living, that this was not the moment to push. Not yet. Push too early, and the whole table would close up like a Venus flytrap and never open again for the rest of the marriage. So instead, she did what she did best. She kept the room laughing. Okay, since apparently the archive is closed for business, she said brightly, turning to the cousin who nearly choked on his soup. Tell me something embarrassing about yourself instead. Fair's fair. I feel like I've learned so much about Min Jae's serial-related emotional collapses and nothing at all about the rest of you, and frankly that feels unbalanced. The tension broke, just slightly, just enough, as the cousin launched, with visible relief, into a long, unnecessary story about a driving test he'd failed 4 times, and the table exhaled as one and moved on, and underneath the laughter Isabella filed away exactly one new fact, sharp and gleaming. Whatever had almost gotten said tonight, whatever the aunt had shut down with that particular, practiced coldness, was not going to stay buried much longer. Not with her in the house. Dinner ended not long after in the strange, brittle quiet of a family that had gotten very good at pretending nothing had happened. As guests filtered out with hurried goodbyes and carefully avoided eye contact, Isabella caught June by the sleeve near the hallway, just before he, or whoever was going to show up next, slipped away for the night.
Wait.
Before you go, or before he comes back, or whatever the etiquette is around here, what was the good one? June glanced toward the dining room, toward the family still lingering in careful little clusters, then back at her, and for the first time since he'd appeared mid-soup course, something like real caution crossed his face. There's always a next time, he said, grin flickering back into place, though it didn't quite sit as easy as before. Ask me again when the audience is smaller. That's not a no. It's also not a yes. Consider it a cliffhanger. I hear you people love those.
June.
Ask him about his father sometime, June said quietly, all the performance dropping out of his voice at once, and it landed heavier in that hallway than the entire dinner's worth of jokes combined. Not me. Him. When you're both ready. Which, for the record, is probably not tonight. Before Isabella could ask what that was even supposed to mean, his shoulders straightened. His posture snapped back into that familiar, rigid, controlled line she'd come to recognize in under 24 hours of marriage. Why are you holding my sleeve? Min Jae said, blinking down at her hand like it had appeared there by dark magic. Isabella let go slowly, staring at him. You really don't remember the last 15 minutes, do you? What are you talking about? We just finished the soup course. We did not just finish the soup course, Min Jae. We finished an entire multi-act comedy special starring your serial commercial tears, and then your aunt shut it down like she was defusing a national security threat. Min Jae went very still. June exaggerates. June seems like the one person at this entire table who tells the truth by accident, which, frankly, given the rest of this family, is a remarkably low bar, and he's still clearing it easily. Something flickered behind Min Jae's eyes. Not quite fear, not quite confusion, something caught between the two, gone as fast as it appeared, shutters coming back down with the fast, practiced ease of a man who'd had a great deal of years to perfect exactly that motion. It's late, he said instead. You should get some rest. Big house. Lots of rooms. Try not to rearrange any more of them before morning. No promises, Isabella said, watching him retreat down the hallway, with far more questions trailing after him than answers, and understanding, with the particular clarity of a woman who never let a mystery lie for long, that whatever this family had spent 15 years burying, it was going to take patience, comedy, and roughly 100 more orange peels before anyone in this house told her the whole truth. She had time. She had suitcases full of time, actually, since apparently she was only booked for 3 days, a fact she fully intended to ignore. Morning arrived in the Kong mansion the way mornings apparently always arrive there, quietly, expensively, and with an alarming number of staff already awake and pretending not to have opinions about the new bride. Isabella found this out the hard way when she wandered into the kitchen at 7 in search of coffee and found 4 members of staff mid-conversation, all of whom fell instantly, suspiciously silent the moment she appeared in the doorway. "Don't stop on my account," she said cheerfully, heading straight for the coffee machine like she owned it, which, technically, as of yesterday, she now partially did. "I love being talked about. Please continue." Was it about the furniture? The music? The 3 separate war crimes I apparently committed against this household in under an hour? Sora, the housekeeper who delivered the garment bag the night before, pressed her lips together so hard they went white. "We were just discussing the menu, ma'am." "Uh-huh. And was I on the menu?" "No, ma'am." "You paused like I was on the menu." "The coffee machine requires a code, ma'am," Sora said instead, deflecting with a smooth, practiced ease of someone who had clearly been doing this exact deflection dance for years. "I can make it for you."
A code.
"For coffee. In this house, everything requires a code, doesn't it? The office. The coffee machine. Possibly the guest bathroom. For all I know, I haven't tried the door handle yet. I'm almost scared to." "The guest bathroom is just a handle, ma'am." "See, now I'm disappointed. I wanted more mystery from the guest bathroom." Sora, despite every visible effort not to, cracked the smallest smile while punching in the code, and Isabella decided, then and there, over the quiet hiss of an extremely expensive espresso machine, that Sora was going to be her first real ally in this house, whether Sora had agreed to the position or not. "Quick question," Isabella said, keeping her voice light, casual, entirely unthreatening, the exact tone she used on suspicious customs officials and reluctant food vendors alike. Totally unrelated to coffee. "Is Min-jae's father alive?" Sora's hand slipped on the machine's controls, and a small hiss of steam escaped where it wasn't supposed to. "I only handle the kitchen and the laundry, ma'am." That wasn't a kitchen question or a laundry question. "I only handle the kitchen and the laundry, ma'am," Sora repeated, in the exact tone of a woman who had been very specifically trained, possibly under threat of unemployment or possibly worse, to say precisely that sentence in response to several very specific categories of question. Interesting policy. Very consistent. Almost like a script. "It's just a coffee machine, ma'am." "We've moved past the coffee machine, Sora. We're deep into subtext now. Please try to keep up." Sora handed over the coffee with the air of a woman who had successfully survived a landmine and had no intention of returning to that particular field, and fled the kitchen at a pace just barely short of a jog. Isabella took her victory. 1 perfect espresso, 0 real answers. Out to the garden, where she found the driver, Byung-ho, polishing a car that did not, by any visible metric, need polishing. "Byung-ho, quick question." "I only drive the car, ma'am," Byung-ho said immediately, without even turning around, the words coming out fast and rehearsed like a man activating a panic button. "I haven't asked the question yet." "I only drive the car, ma'am," he repeated, exactly as fast, exactly as rehearsed. You know, that's suspiciously similar phrasing to what Sora said 15 minutes ago. "Did the 2 of you rehearse this? Is there a group chat? Am I not invited to the group chat? Because, frankly, at this point, I feel like I've earned an invitation." Byung-ho said nothing whatsoever, which Isabella decided, filing it carefully into the growing case folder in her head, was itself the loudest possible answer this family had given her yet. By mid-morning, she'd cornered Min-jae directly in his study, the one room she was explicitly, emphatically banned from, which was, naturally, exactly why she chose it. He looked up from his desk, entirely unsurprised, like he'd known this particular confrontation was inevitable from the moment her suitcase had first hit the marble floor. "You're in the office." "I'm aware. I've chosen to view it as reconnaissance rather than trespassing. There's a legal difference." "There is no legal difference." "There is in the legal system I invented this morning, which currently governs this entire household, effective immediately, no appeals process." She sat down directly across from him without waiting to be asked, folding her hands on his desk with the calm authority of a woman conducting the interview rather than receiving one. Tell me about your father. Min Jae's jaw tightened, just slightly, just enough for someone paying very close attention to catch it. There's nothing to tell. June disagrees. Your aunt very aggressively disagrees, with volume and everything. Sora and Byung-ho have apparently been issued matching scripts. That's 4 separate people in one house all disagreeing with you in perfect, suspicious unison. Min Jae, and I have not even gotten to the cousins yet. They weren't given scripts, they're just terrified.
Yes.
I noticed. It's becoming something of a running theme around here, right up there with unnecessary furniture and coffee machines that require security clearance. Min Jae set his pen down slowly, exhaling the particular exhale of a man about to say something he'd rehearsed many times privately and had hoped, right up until this exact moment, to never actually need. My father died when I was young, he said. It's not a mystery. It's just not something this family discusses. Grief doesn't need an audience, Isabella. See, that's interesting, Isabella said gently, all the sharpness draining slowly out of her voice, because that's not remotely what June implied last night. June said you don't remember everything. That's a very specific, very strange thing to say about your own father's death. Most people remember their own grief just fine. It's usually the thing that sticks the hardest. For a long moment, Min Jae didn't answer. Outside the study window, a gardener trimmed a hedge into a shape that was almost, but not quite, a dragon, the same way this entire family seemed almost, but not quite, willing to hand her the truth. I was 12, he said finally, quietly, all the polish gone from his voice at once. There are things about that particular night I don't remember. The doctors said it was trauma. My mind protecting itself. I made my peace with that a long time ago. Have you, though? Isabella asked, softer now, the fight gone entirely out of her tone. Because June didn't look like a man at peace last night, Min Jae. He looked like a man carrying something heavy that he's never once been allowed to put down. Min Jae looked at her for a long moment, something raw flickering behind the careful architecture of his face for the very first time since she'd met him, and for once, he didn't reach for a rule to hide behind. I don't actually know what happened to my father, he admitted quietly. Nobody in this house will give me the whole story. I stopped asking a long time ago. It seemed easier. Well, Isabella said, standing, smoothing down her dress, squaring her shoulders like a woman gearing up for a fight she had every intention of winning. I just started asking. And I don't do easy. Ask anyone. It's basically my whole personality, right after the furniture rearranging. She left him sitting there with that particular unsettled look men got when they realized, for the first time, that the chaos they'd married into might actually be paying attention, and marched straight into the garden to clear her head, which in Isabella's case usually meant finding something to eat and someone new to interrogate, ideally at the same time. She found the eating part easily enough, a small table set with fruit that nobody seemed to be using, but the someone new part found her instead, in the form of a low, distracted voice from a bench at the garden's edge. You're new, the voice said. Isabella turned, expecting another cousin or possibly another aunt lying in wait, and instead found a man sitting alone with a sketchbook balanced on his knee, shoulders soft and unhurried in a way that was, by this point, instantly recognizable as not Min Jae. Let me guess, Isabella said, sitting down across from him without waiting for an invitation, because invitations in this house appeared to be optional at best. You're not Min Jae either. No, he agreed, mild as anything, like this wasn't a strange thing at all to confirm to a total stranger over a bowl of untouched mangoes. I'm Daniel. Of course you are, Isabella said, dropping her head back with a groan directed at the sky, at the mansion, at the entire concept of marriage. Naturally. Why would there only be 2 of you? That would be far too simple for this family, and simplicity is clearly against the house rules, right alongside furniture and loud music. Daniel blinked at her, genuinely puzzled. You've met June already? I've met June. I've been threatened by an aunt. I've been given matching non-answers by 2 separate staff members. I feel like I'm assembling a very strange trading card set, and you're the third one I've pulled. Which card would that make me? Daniel asked, and there was something so genuinely, quietly curious in the question that Isabella found herself laughing despite the entire chaotic morning behind her. Rare pull. Definitely rare. You've got a sketchbook, which none of the others had, so already you're winning on accessories alone. I like drawing, Daniel said simply, and went back to his page like the conversation had reached a perfectly satisfying conclusion, which, for a man who apparently shared a body with a stand-up comedian and a corporate robot, felt like an almost suspiciously normal thing to say. What do you draw? Whatever's there. Deeply specific. Very illuminating. I feel like I know you already. Daniel actually smiled at that, small and unhurried, and for a few minutes they just sat there, Isabella peeling a mango with more enthusiasm than the task strictly required, Daniel's pencil moving in soft, patient strokes across the page, and it was, against every odd this house had thrown at her so far, genuinely peaceful. Almost suspiciously peaceful. Isabella had learned by now that suspiciously peaceful moments in this house had a habit of not staying that way for long. "Can I ask you something?" she said eventually, because peace had never once in her life lasted longer than she allowed it to. "You've been asking things since you sat down."
Fair.
"Can I ask you something specific?" Daniel glanced up, unbothered. "You can ask. I might not have the answer. I rarely do, honestly. Everyone assumes I remember more than I do, because I'm the quiet one. Quiet doesn't mean informed. It just means I get interrupted less." That's oddly profound for a man who is just very committed to a mango-adjacent silence. "I contain multitudes," Daniel said dryly, and Isabella barked out a laugh loud enough that a gardener 3 hedges over glanced up in alarm. "Okay, multitudes. Tell me about the father situation." The pencil stopped. It wasn't dramatic, not at first, just a small pause, the kind anyone might make mid-sketch to consider a line, but Isabella had spent 3 days now learning exactly how this family paused around that particular subject, and this pause had the same shape as all the others. "I don't know much," Daniel said carefully, resuming his sketching with visibly more deliberate strokes now, like he was concentrating very hard on appearing unconcerned. "Min-jae doesn't talk about it. June jokes about it, which is his way of not talking about it either, if you think about it. And me," he hesitated. "I mostly just see things. I don't always know what they mean." "See things how?" "Pictures. Sometimes when I close my eyes. Sometimes when I'm drawing, and I'm not really deciding what goes on the page. It just arrives." He said it so plainly, so without drama, that it took Isabella a second to register how strange a sentence that actually was. "That sounds unsettling." "It used to be. I've had a long time to get used to it." He offered her the faintest smile, the kind that didn't quite reach all the way to his eyes. "You get used to almost anything, given enough time. Even the strange parts." "I refuse to accept that as a life philosophy, personally, but I respect the resilience." "You would say that. You've been here 4 days, and you've already rearranged the furniture, apparently. News travels fast in this house. Sora talks to Byung-ho. Byung-ho talks to the gardener. The gardener talks to everyone, constantly, about everything. He's actually the best source of information in this entire mansion, and nobody utilizes him properly." Daniel's pencil kept moving, steady, unhurried, and Isabella found herself leaning in slightly, drawn less by urgency now and more by the strange, gentle gravity of him. The first person in this house who seemed entirely unbothered by anything at all, right up until the moment his hand, mid-stroke, went very slightly still. "Daniel?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes had gone distant, fixed somewhere just past the page, past the garden, past anything actually in front of him. "Daniel, you're doing the thing." "What thing?" "The thing where you go somewhere else while your body stays here. It's very unsettling, 10 out of 10. Would not recommend. Please come back." He blinked, and whatever had pulled him away released him, and he looked down at the page like he wasn't entirely certain what his own hand had been doing while he wasn't watching. "Sorry," he said. "I do that sometimes. I told you, things arrive." "What arrived just now?" Daniel hesitated, fingers tightening slightly around the pencil, and for the first time since she'd sat down, something like genuine reluctance crossed his face. Nothing important. Daniel. It's really nothing. Daniel. I have interrogated a coffee machine, a car, and a husband today. I have stamina. I have snacks. I am not going anywhere. He looked at her for a long moment, weighing something, and then, slowly, almost against his own better judgment, turned the notebook around. It was a hallway. Long, quiet, rendered in careful graphite shading, tall windows letting in thin bars of light, a distinctive tiled floor stretching out toward some far, unseen end. And there, near the base of one wall, a dark stain spreading slowly across the tile like ink dropped in still water. Isabella's stomach dropped before her brain had even finished catching up to why. Daniel, she said carefully, all the banter draining out of her voice at once. Where is this? I don't know, he said, and for the first time, his easy calm had genuinely cracked, just at the edges, just enough to show something frightened underneath. I just draw what arrives sometimes. I don't choose it. Have you been there? This hallway, have you actually seen it, walk through it, anything?
No.
His voice had gone thinner now, unsteady in a way it hadn't been a minute ago. I've never seen this hallway in my life. I don't even know if it's a real place. Isabella looked back down at the drawing, at the exact, deliberate shading of that stain, too specific, too careful, too consistent in its detail to be nothing at all, an invention, a coincidence, a trick of an idle hand. Then why, she said slowly, quietly, did you draw the bloodstain? Daniel froze completely. His pencil stopped midair, hovering uselessly over the page. For a long moment he didn't move, didn't blink, didn't seem to breathe at all, like the question had reached down into some part of him that hadn't been touched in a very long time, and didn't especially want to be touched now. I don't know, he said again, but his voice had gone to almost nothing, barely audible over the quiet rustle of the garden around them. I see it sometimes. When I close my eyes. A hallway. And someone standing at the end of it.
Who?
I can't. He shook his head, hard, like he was trying to physically shake something loose. I've tried. I can't see their face. It's always just shadow. A shape. But I know they were there. That night. Whatever night this is. Isabella's pulse had picked up fast now, the garden around them suddenly, strangely still, like the whole property was holding its breath along with him. The night his father died. Daniel looked up at her then, eyes wide, genuinely frightened for the first time since she'd met him. I don't know whose memory this even is, he whispered. I don't know if it's his or mine, or something else entirely that doesn't belong to any of us at all. I just know that hallway is real. I know somebody was standing at the end of it. And I know, his hand trembled slightly over the page, over that dark, careful stain, that whoever it was, they never should have been forgotten. Nobody in this house was ever supposed to let them be forgotten. Before Isabella could push even an inch further, before she could ask the dozen new questions already crowding up behind her teeth, Daniel's whole posture shifted. His shoulders pulled back, straightened, and his face rearranged itself into something more composed, more guarded, more familiar. Min-jae blinked at her across the garden table, at the sketchbook lying open between them, at her stricken expression, utterly lost. Why do you look like you've seen a ghost? He said. Isabella looked down at the drawing, the hallway, the tile, the stain, the faceless shadow standing at the end of the corridor, and then back up at the man who had absolutely no memory of ever having drawn it. Because I think I just met one, she said quietly. And I think he's been waiting a very, very long time for somebody in this house to finally listen to him. That doesn't make any sense, Min-jae said, though his eyes kept flicking back to the page against his own will, like it was a wound he couldn't stop touching. I don't draw. I've never drawn. I can barely sign my own name legibly. My assistant has complained about it in 3 separate performance reviews. You don't draw. Daniel draws. There's a difference, and I feel like at this point in our marriage, you should really be keeping a scoreboard. There is no scoreboard. There should be. I'd win. I'm currently up 1 existential crisis to 0. Min-jae closed the sketchbook slowly, like shutting it might undo what was already inside it, and set it down on the table between them with the careful, wary reverence of a man handling something that might go off. "I need to think," he said. "You do that. I'm going to go interrogate the gardener. Daniel says he knows everything and nobody utilizes him properly, and frankly, I intend to be the exception." "You're going to interrogate the gardener. He talks to Byung-ho, who talks to Sora, who apparently talks to nobody except in scripted non-answers. So, I'm going straight to the source."
Cut out the middlemen.
"It's basic supply chain logic. Min-jae, I thought you of all people would appreciate that." Despite everything, the sketchbook, the stain, the whole unraveling morning, something in Min-jae's face twitched toward a laugh. He clearly wasn't in the mood to allow himself. "You're going to get yourself banned from this entire property by sundown. I've survived worse bans. There was an incident with a wedding vendor in Lagos. I'll tell you about it sometime. It's a whole saga, very cinematic. I genuinely don't know if I want to hear it or if I want to protect myself from ever hearing it. Both are valid instincts. I'd lean toward hearing it, personally, but I'm biased. I'm the protagonist of that story." He shook his head, and for just a second, watching her stand and dust off her dress with the unbothered energy of a woman who just watched a hallway materialize out of a stranger's subconscious and decided the next logical move was to go bully a gardener for information, something in his chest loosened slightly, unfamiliar and almost pleasant, wedged in right alongside the dread. The gardener, as it turned out, was significantly more forthcoming than Sora or Byung-ho, mostly because nobody in this family had ever thought to formally instruct him not to talk, on the theory, apparently, that nobody important ever asked the gardener anything. "The old wing," he said, not even looking up from the hedge he was shaping into something that was almost, but not quite, a dragon. "East side. Second floor. They don't use it anymore." "Why not? Renovated around it instead of through it," he said, with the particular satisfaction of a man delivering a fact he'd clearly wanted to say out loud for years and never had the right audience for. "Very expensive way to avoid a hallway, if you ask me. Cheaper to just walk through it. But nobody asked me. I'm asking you now. You're the first one who has." He clipped a stray leaf with surgical precision and finally glanced up at her, something almost like approval in his weathered face. "You want my honest opinion, ma'am? This house has been holding its breath for 15 years. Somebody's going to have to let it out eventually. Might as well be the new bride. Everyone else here's had their whole life to work up the nerve, and none of them have managed it yet." Isabella felt something settle in her chest, steady and sure, the same feeling she got right before winning an argument she hadn't technically started yet. "Well," she said, already turning back toward the house, toward the old wing, toward whatever hallway was waiting for her at the end of all this borrowed silence. "Good thing I've never needed nerve. I run on spite and curiosity. Endlessly renewable resources, both of them." The gardener almost smiled at that, going back to his hedge like the conversation had never happened at all, and behind her, unnoticed, a curtain shifted in a second-floor window of the old wing, just slightly, just enough, as someone inside watched her cross the garden with far more interest than any member of this family had shown her since the wedding. If you've made it this far, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from and what time it is right now wherever you are. We love seeing the whole map light up. Smash that like button, subscribe if this is your first time in the Kong Mansion, and remember, the channel membership gets you early access to every single twist before it ever goes public. Isabella came into this marriage for a business arrangement and 3 days of peace. She's leaving this garden with a bloodstain she can't explain, a husband who doesn't remember drawing it, and a whole lot more questions than answers. This story is just getting started. Word got around the mansion fast, faster than Isabella had expected, faster than any hallway ambush or coffee machine interrogation had prepared her for, and by the time she made it back inside for lunch, the aunt was already waiting for her in the sitting room, perched on the very armchair Isabella had personally relocated 4 inches to the left on day 1, looking like she'd been sitting there rehearsing her opening line for exactly that long. "I hear you've been talking to the gardener," the aunt said, without preamble, without so much as a greeting. "I talk to everyone. It's part of my charm. Ask anyone who's ever met me. They'll confirm it, sometimes against their will. I also hear you've seen a drawing." Isabella stopped mid-step, orange already halfway to her mouth. News really does travel fast in this house. Faster than my Wi-Fi, and that's genuinely saying something because I've been trying to load one photo to send my mother for 2 days. This family has survived a great deal by knowing which doors to leave closed, the aunt said, standing now, smoothing down her dress with the same crisp, controlled motion Min-jae used when he was buying himself time to think. I would have thought a woman clever enough to break 4 house rules in one afternoon would also be clever enough to recognize a closed door when she saw one. Oh, I recognize it, Isabella said, setting the orange down, all playfulness draining slowly out of her voice, replaced by something steadier, sharper. I just don't respect it. There's a difference, and I feel like I'm saying that phrase a lot in this house, which tells you something about how many differences this family conveniently refuses to acknowledge. The aunt's mouth thinned into a hard line. You've been here 4 days. And in 4 days I've met 3 different men living in one body, found a bloodstain nobody wants to explain, and had 2 separate staff members recite identical non-answers like they were reading off the same cue card. I don't need 15 years in this house to know when something's rotten, ma'am. I just need a working nose. For a moment, the aunt looked almost impressed, in the reluctant, tight-lipped way of a woman encountering an opponent she hadn't fully accounted for. Then the mask came back down, colder than before. Careful, she said. Curiosity has a cost in this family. Ask Daniel. Ask June. Ask any of them what it's cost them so far, and then ask yourself whether you're prepared to pay the same price. Is that a threat, or is this another one of your kindnesses? I'm having trouble telling them apart at this point. You should really work on your delivery. It's an observation, the aunt said, moving past her toward the door, pausing only once, hand on the frame, without turning around, made by someone who has watched this family survive exactly one storm already. We did not survive it by asking every question that occurred to us. We survived it by knowing which ones to leave alone. She left. Isabella stood there in the sitting room, orange forgotten entirely now, staring at the space where the aunt had been, turning that sentence over and over in her head. Exactly one storm already. Not a metaphor. Not a throwaway line. A fact, dropped deliberately, the way people only ever dropped facts when some small, stubborn part of them actually wanted to be caught. She found Min-jae an hour later in the study, staring at nothing in particular, the sketchbook still sitting closed on the corner of his desk like neither of them had worked up the courage to open it again. Your aunt just threatened me. Again. Politely. With a smile, even very on brand for this family at this point. What did she say? That curiosity has a cost, and that this family survived exactly one storm already by knowing which questions to leave alone. Isabella sat down across from him, this time without the earlier bravado, something quieter and more serious settling over her. Min-jae. What storm is she talking about? He was quiet for a long moment, jaw working, and when he finally spoke his voice had none of its usual polish. There was a period, right after my father, after whatever happened to my father before I had language for any of it, where the company nearly collapsed. Board disputes. Family disputes. People left. People didn't come back. I don't remember most of it. I was 12 and apparently unconscious for a chunk of it, but I've pieced together enough over the years to know it was bad. Bad enough that my aunt took over running things until I was old enough. Bad enough that certain names in this family just stopped being said out loud. Names like whose? I don't know, he admitted, and there was something almost desperate in the honesty of it, like the words had been sitting behind his teeth for years waiting for someone to finally ask the right way. That's the thing, Isabella. I don't know. Nobody ever told me. I grew up in a house full of ghosts nobody would name, and I got so good at not asking that I forgot I was even allowed to. Well, Isabella said, reaching across the desk, resting her hand near his again, the same small, steady offer she'd made once before. I'm allowed to. I've never once in my life needed permission to ask a question, and I'm not about to start now. So, if your family wants to keep their storm quiet, they picked possibly the single worst woman on the entire continent to marry into keeping that particular secret. Something in Min-jae's shoulders eased, just slightly, at that. Like her stubbornness was less a threat now, and more the first solid ground he'd stood on in 15 years of careful, practiced silence. "Where do we even start?" he said quietly. "The old wing's locked now. My aunt made sure of that within an hour of finding out you'd been down there. Then we start with whoever's still willing to talk," Isabella said, already standing, already thinking 3 steps ahead in the particular way she always did once a plan started forming. "The gardener talks. Sora almost talks. June definitely knows more than he's letting on, and Daniel's clearly seeing things whether he wants to or not. That's 4 cracks in one very expensive wall, Min-jae. I just need to lean on the right one at the right time. And if leaning on the wrong one gets someone hurt?" My aunt wasn't exactly subtle about that part. Isabella paused at the door, looking back at him. Really looking, past the polish, past the careful company man posture he wore like armor, to the boy underneath who'd woken up in a hospital bed at 12 years old with 2 missing days and a family that decided silence was easier than grief. "Then we'll deal with that when it happens," she said, gentler now than she'd been all day. "But Min-jae, I don't think silence has kept anyone in this house safe. I think it's just kept everyone quiet. Those aren't the same thing, and deep down, I think you already know that, or you wouldn't have let me keep asking this long." She left him there with that, the study door clicking softly shut behind her, and somewhere in the quiet, locked-up old wing of the house, a light flicked on in a room that was supposed to be empty, burned for exactly 4 seconds, and went dark again, unseen, unremarked, but very much real, the second such flicker in as many nights, and proof, if anyone had been watching closely enough to notice, that Isabella wasn't the only one in this house whose plans had just changed. Isabella just found out this family survived a storm nobody will name, and there's a light on in a wing of the house that's supposed to be empty. This story is only getting darker from here. Isabella decided, over a breakfast nobody had invited her to, but that she attended anyway on the grounds that she technically lived there now, that the fastest way to find out who was afraid of her was to announce, loudly, at the most crowded possible table, that she was leaving. "I'm leaving," she said, buttering a piece of toast with the calm, unbothered energy of a woman announcing the weather. Every fork in the room stopped moving. "You're what?" Min-jae said. "Leaving. Packing my 1 suitcase, which, may I remind everyone, I have not even fully unpacked because apparently I was only ever guaranteed 3 days in the first place, and returning to my actual life, where the coffee machine does not require a security clearance. You cannot just announce that at breakfast." "I just did. Watch me eat toast while I do it. It's very dramatic. I've been practicing." She took a large, unbothered bite, chewing slowly while the entire table stared at her like she'd set the tablecloth on fire. "This marriage was a business arrangement. I've done my due diligence. I've concluded the business is haunted. I'm exercising my right to return the product." Down the table, the aunt's teacup rattled softly against its saucer, the first crack in her composure Isabella had seen since the hallway confrontation, and 2 cousins exchanged a look so loaded it could have qualified as its own separate conversation. "You're bluffing," Min-jae said low, only for her. "Obviously," Isabella murmured back, not moving her smile an inch. "I'm not going anywhere. I just want to see who gets nervous." By the time breakfast ended, 3 people had gotten very nervous indeed, though for wildly different reasons and with wildly different levels of subtlety. A cousin had suddenly discovered an urgent need to check something on his phone, twice, in the middle of a sentence about weather patterns. Sora had dropped an entire tray of tea, which under normal circumstances might mean nothing, except Sora had not dropped so much as a spoon in 6 years of employment, a fact she herself announced, mortified, while cleaning it up. And the aunt had left the table entirely 11 minutes early, murmuring something about correspondence that needed urgent attention, in a tone that suggested the correspondence in question had never existed until roughly 90 seconds ago. "Well," Isabella said, watching the ants retreating back with the deep satisfaction of a woman whose trap had worked exactly as designed, "that was informative." Min-jae leaned toward her once the table had mostly cleared, voice low. "You just caused an international incident over toast." "I caused a domestic incident over toast. International would require at least 2 countries actively involved, and as far as I know, This is still just the one very large, very haunted house. My aunt hasn't left a meal early in 15 years. See, now that's the kind of statistic I love. 15 years of perfect attendance, broken by one woman and a well-timed announcement of departure. I should get a plaque. Isabella. Ended a streak. Very simple, very to the point. You're enjoying this. I am enjoying this immensely, yes. Thank you for noticing. It's the first genuinely fun thing that's happened since the wedding, and the wedding, may I remind you, involved a 400-guest audience and a dress that required its own zip code. June surfaced briefly over dessert, a small, involuntary appearance, gone again within 30 seconds, but long enough to lean toward her and mutter, "Whatever you just did at breakfast, do it again." I haven't seen this family this rattled since the Great Fish Course incident of several years ago, which, incidentally, remains one of my finest bits. Ask me about it sometime. Before Min-jae blinked back into place mid-sentence, utterly unaware he'd just endorsed his own wife's chaos campaign. What fish course incident? Isabella demanded immediately. I have no idea what you're talking about. June just told me to ask you about the fish course incident. June does not get to make plans on my behalf. June seems to disagree, given that he just did exactly that 30 seconds ago, over your own dessert. Min-jae pinched the bridge of his nose in the exact gesture Isabella had already come to recognize as his personal signal for I have accidentally married chaos itself, and there is no undoing it now. There is no fish course incident. There's absolutely a fish course incident, and I will find out about it if it's the last thing I do in this house. Please don't make that your priority over, say, the attempted murder-marriage conspiracy. I contain multitudes, Min-jae. I can investigate several disasters simultaneously. It's called multitasking, look it up. That night, Isabella returned to her room to find a folded note slipped beneath her door. No signature, handwriting careful and deliberate in a way that suggested someone who had thought very hard about every word before committing to paper. If you leave this family, you will never find out what happened to his father. Some of us would rather you stayed and finished what you started. Isabella read it twice, turned it over looking for more, found nothing, and sat down heavily on the enormous, ridiculous bed with the sudden, dizzying realization that somebody in this house, somebody who was not the aunt, was not the staff on script, was not any of the men currently sharing Min-jae's body, actually wanted her digging. Okay, she said out loud, to the empty room, to the note, to the entire absurd house. So, it's not everyone who wants me gone. That's new information. That's very new information, and I don't love how many new suspects that just added to my list. She marched straight to the kitchen the next morning, note in hand, and found Sora elbow-deep in dishes, humming to herself in the particular way of a woman who thought she was alone.
Sora.
Handwriting analysis. I need your professional opinion. Sora startled so hard she nearly dropped a plate. My what? Handwriting analysis. Look at this note. Does this look like anyone's handwriting you recognize? Take your time. Really study it. I have snacks if this takes a while. Sora took the note reluctantly, studied it for exactly 4 seconds, and handed it back like it had personally offended her. I only handle the kitchen and the laundry, ma'am. Sora, that phrase doesn't even apply here. There's no kitchen component to this question whatsoever. You're just saying it now out of muscle memory. I only handle the kitchen and the laundry, ma'am, Sora repeated, somehow even faster the second time, already backing toward the pantry like it might offer sanctuary.
Fine.
Noted. Muscle memory it is. I respect the commitment to the bit. Honestly, at this point it's borderline impressive. She tried Byung-ho next, catching him polishing the same spotless car for what had to be the 9th consecutive day. A car so clean at this point that Isabella privately suspected it had never once actually been driven. Byung-ho. Handwriting. I only drive the car, ma'am, he said instantly, not even glancing at the note, eyes fixed dead ahead like a man reciting a hostage statement. You didn't even look at it. I only drive the car, ma'am. That's not an answer. That's a hostage negotiation tactic. Are you being held against your will? Blink twice. Byung-ho, with the composure of a man who had clearly weathered stranger interrogations than this one, blinked exactly 0 times and resumed polishing. Isabella gave up on staff intelligence for the morning and decided to try the direct approach instead, which was, historically, her favorite approach anyway, mostly because it required the least amount of patience. She caught June over lunch, a lucky, unscheduled appearance, Min-jae's shoulders loosening mid-conversation about quarterly projections into June's familiar, unbothered slouch, and slid the note across the table before he'd even fully settled into himself. Recognize this handwriting? June picked it up, scanned it, and let out a low whistle.
Ooh, cryptic.
Very noir. Somebody's been watching too many late-night dramas. Focus. June handwriting. Yes or no? Give me a second. I'm admiring the penmanship first. This is genuinely lovely cursive. Whoever wrote this clearly took a calligraphy class at some point, possibly against their will, possibly at gunpoint. This family does everything under duress. He squinted at it a moment longer, tilting it toward the light.
No.
Doesn't ring a bell.
Sorry.
I'd tell you if it did. I love drama. I would absolutely rat someone out for the entertainment value alone. That's oddly reassuring and also deeply concerning. I contain multitudes. He handed the note back, suddenly more serious than she'd seen him since the retiled hallway. But if somebody's slipping you secret notes at midnight, Isabella, that means somebody in this house is playing a much longer game than the rest of us realize. And in my experience, the quiet players are always scarier than the loud ones. I would know. I'm extremely loud, and I've never once been the dangerous one. Comforting.
Truly.
You should put that on a business card. I've considered it. June. Loud, not dangerous. Very marketable. What about Daniel? Could it be him? Daniel draws things he doesn't understand. He doesn't write cryptic warnings with suspiciously excellent penmanship. That's not really his register. June leaned back, tapping the table thoughtfully. Mr. K, maybe. He's dramatic in a very buttoned-up way. Very, I will save the world through excessive paperwork energy. There's a Mr. K? Oh, you haven't met Mr. K yet? Oh, this is going to be great. Absolutely, definitely go meet Mr. K. Tell him I said hi. He hates when I say hi. It throws off his whole vibe. Where do I find Mr. K? Wherever the filing cabinets are saddest, June said cheerfully, already reaching for the bread basket like the conversation had reached its natural, satisfying conclusion. You'll know him when you see him. He's basically a human do not disturb sign. She didn't sleep much that night either, which was becoming something of a pattern, and by morning she'd resolved to do the single most reasonable thing available to a woman in her exact, extremely unreasonable situation: find whoever had left the note, and find out precisely which side of this family they were secretly playing for. It took her 2 days of increasingly aggressive small talk for separate bribed staff members, bribed with gossip rather than money, which turned out to be far more effective currency in this particular household, and one extremely uncomfortable conversation with a cousin who genuinely believed she was flirting with him when she was, in fact, threatening him very politely, before she finally cornered the one member of this family she hadn't properly met yet. The uncomfortable cousin conversation deserved, in Isabella's professional opinion, its own separate footnote in whatever memoir she eventually wrote about surviving this family. It had started innocently enough, with her asking casually over afternoon tea whether he knew anything about a man named Mr. K, and had ended, 20 increasingly bizarre minutes later, with the cousin attempting to hold her hand across the table and declaring that he, personally, found a woman who asks difficult questions to be extremely attractive. I'm married to your cousin, Isabella had said, retrieving her hand as gently as the situation allowed. An arrangement, he'd said, waving this off like a minor technicality. Everyone knows it's an arrangement. It was an arrangement. It is rapidly becoming several other things, none of which involve you, and one of which currently involves me finding out whether someone in this family is a murderer, so if you don't mind, I'm going to redirect this conversation entirely. That's very intense for a Tuesday. Welcome to my Tuesdays. They're all like this now. He had not, in the end, provided any useful information about Mr. K whatsoever, but he had, in a stroke of accidental usefulness, mentioned offhand that the serious one usually worked out of the room behind the library, which was, Isabella reflected afterward, probably the single most helpful thing any relative in this family had told her since her arrival, delivered entirely by accident in the middle of an ill-advised flirtation attempt. He was sitting in a room she hadn't known existed, tucked behind the library, surrounded by files organized with a precision that made Min Jae's tidy desk look like a crime scene by comparison. He looked up when she opened the door without knocking, entirely unsurprised, like he'd been expecting this particular interruption for exactly as long as she'd been in the house. "You're not Min Jae," Isabella said, by now able to identify this fact within roughly 1.5 seconds of eye contact. "No," the man agreed, setting down his pen with the unhurried precision of someone who had never once in his life been rushed by anything. "I'm not. Let me guess. Another one. Do you have a number? I feel like I need a numbering system at this point. I've got June, I've got Daniel, I've clearly got you. I'm starting to think I married an entire subway car of people." "Mr. K," he said, in a voice so flat and dry it took her a second to realize it might have been a joke. "That's what they call me. It's not my real name. None of us are entirely sure any of us have real names anymore if you want to get philosophical about it, which I generally don't recommend before noon." "Mr. K," Isabella repeated slowly. "As in the letter K. As in the single most mysterious possible option available on the entire alphabet. Did you get first pick? Because if I were assembling a secret identity, I feel like I'd have gone bigger. Mr. Danger. Mr. Midnight. Something with a little flourish. I didn't choose it." "No, but you're clearly leaning into it. Look at this room. Files everywhere. Dim lighting. You're basically doing cosplay of a man with secrets." "I contain actual secrets. The cosplay is somewhat unavoidable." "See, that's the kind of confidence I respect. June would have made that into a whole bit. You just stated it like a weather report. June and I have very different operating systems." "Clearly. He's the deluxe entertainment package. You're what? The terms and conditions nobody reads but definitely should." Something that might, on a more expressive face, have qualified as amusement flickered briefly across Mr. K's features and was gone just as fast. "You need to stop digging," he said instead. Isabella sat down across from him without being invited, the same move she'd used on Min Jae in the study on day one, because apparently it was simply how she introduced herself to men in this family now. "Everybody keeps telling me that. It's honestly getting a little repetitive. I feel like this family needs new material." "Because you're getting close." Isabella's whole posture changed at that, leaning forward now, every trace of banter momentarily set aside. "Close to what, exactly?" "Because everyone in this house loves telling me I'm close to something and nobody's brave enough to actually finish the sentence." Mr. K studied her for a long moment, weighing something behind those careful, unreadable eyes, and then, slowly, deliberately, said the sentence nobody else in this house had managed in 4 days of asking. "Min Jae's father didn't die by accident." The room went very still. "Okay," Isabella said quietly, all the fight in her voice replaced by something steadier, graver. That's a real sentence." Finally, somebody said an actual sentence with actual information in it. "I want to frame this moment." "I'm not finished," Mr. K said, and there was something almost warning in his tone. "I know that much. I don't know who is responsible. I've spent years trying to find out, and I've gotten exactly as far as you have, which is to say, nowhere, but with excellent documentation of the nowhere I've gotten." He gestured, faintly, at the wall of files behind him, and for the first time Isabella noticed the labels, dates, names, half of them crossed out, none of them, as far as she could tell, actually leading anywhere conclusive. "Then why tell me now? Everybody else in this family has spent 4 days actively trying to keep me from finding out anything at all. Because you're the first person in 15 years reckless enough to actually keep asking," Mr. K said, and it wasn't quite a compliment, but it wasn't quite not one either. "And because I'm tired. I've been the one holding all of this alone for a very long time, Isabella, and frankly, it's exhausting being the serious one. June gets to make jokes. Daniel gets to draw pretty pictures and call it processing. I get the filing cabinets and the 15 years of dead ends. I would very much like some company in the misery, if it's all the same to you." Isabella actually laughed at that, short and surprised, the sound cutting oddly through the tension of the room. That might be the most honest thing anyone said to me in this entire house, and it was delivered with less enthusiasm than a parking ticket. I contain very little enthusiasm. It's not really in my design specifications. Okay, Mr. K, serious one. Misery correspondent. Let's find something in this filing cabinet graveyard of yours that actually goes somewhere. It took them the better part of that afternoon and most of the evening, working through the old wing under the cover of the staff's dinner shift, when the house was at its quietest and the aunt was occupied elsewhere with what she described, ominously, as correspondence. Does anyone in this family have actual correspondence? Isabella whispered as they crept down the hallway. Or is that just the official house euphemism for doing something suspicious? In my experience, the two are rarely mutually exclusive, Mr. K said, not whispering at all, walking at a completely normal volume like a man who considered stealth beneath him. You could try being quieter. I could. I've found that people who whisper look far more suspicious than people who simply walk somewhere like they belong there. Confidence is its own disguise. That's either very wise or very reckless, and I genuinely cannot tell which. Welcome to knowing me. Mr. K led her to a storage room at the very end of the hallway with a retiled floor, unlocked with a key Isabella strongly suspected he wasn't technically supposed to have anymore. Where did you even get that key? I made a copy of it in 2019. You've had a spare key to a locked, forbidden storage room for 5 years, and this is the first I'm hearing about it. You've been here 5 days. That's not the flex you think it is, Mr. K. That's just poor time management on your part. Inside, behind a stack of boxes that had clearly not been touched in years, they found it. A ledger. Old, leather-bound, the pages slightly warped with damp, tucked so far back into a shelf that it had clearly been meant to stay lost. Well, Isabella breathed, flipping it open with the reverent care of a woman handling either treasure or a live bomb. That's not ominous at all. Very normal thing to find hidden behind a stack of unrelated boxes in a locked room in a wing nobody's supposed to enter. Truly, a family that screams nothing to see here. Check the dates, Mr. K said, already reading over her shoulder. Give me a second, I'm having a moment. This is genuinely the most exciting thing that's happened to me since the fish course incident, which I still haven't gotten the full story on, by the way, and at this point I consider that a personal failure. There is no fish course incident. That's exactly what Min Jae said. Which means there's definitely a fish course incident, and this family is somehow better at hiding a dinner mishap than a 15-year cover-up, which honestly tells you everything about this household's priorities. Isabella, the dates. I contain multitudes, Mr. K. I can appreciate good penmanship and also solve a murder at the same time. But her voice had gone quieter now, all the jokes draining slowly out of it as her finger traced down the column to the final entry, the largest transfer of them all, and the account name attached to it. She read it once. Read it again, just to be sure her eyes weren't playing tricks on her in the dim light of a storage room she absolutely was not supposed to be in. That's your aunt's account, she said slowly. That's my aunt's account, Mr. K confirmed, voice carefully, deliberately flat, in the exact way of a man who had clearly braced himself for this exact discovery for a very long time and still wasn't entirely ready for it. Well, Isabella said, closing the ledger with a soft, final thud that seemed to echo far louder than it should have in the quiet storage room. I did not expect the plot twist to be the same woman who called my dress bold. I genuinely thought that was just garden variety judgmental aunt behavior. Turns out it might have been guilt the whole time. That's rude, honestly. I was ready to hate her for the dress comment alone, and now I have to hate her for a whole extra, much more serious reason. And frankly, that's a lot of emotional restructuring to do on a Tuesday. If you've made it this far, drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from and what time it is on your end. We want the whole map lit up before this story gets any darker, and trust me, it's about to. Smash that like button, hit subscribe if you haven't yet, and remember the channel membership gets you early access to every twist the second it drops, before anyone else sees it. Isabella just found the one piece of hard evidence this entire family has spent 15 years hiding, and it points directly at the last person she expected. But this story loves a plot twist, and this one is not, in fact, finished twisting yet. So stick around, because the next reveal is bigger than the ledger, bigger than the hallway, and it's coming faster than anyone in this house is ready for. Isabella marched straight to the aunt's private sitting room the next morning with the ledger tucked under one arm like a woman walking into court fully prepared to win, Mr. K trailing a few steps behind with the resigned energy of a man who had learned, over many years, exactly how badly these confrontations tended to go and had decided to attend anyway out of sheer, weary curiosity. "You're really doing this," Mr. K said, keeping pace with her down the hallway. "I'm really doing this. I've been rehearsing my opening line since 6 this morning." "You have an opening line?" "Everyone should have an opening line, Mr. K. It's basic courtroom theater. You walk in, you set the tone, you establish dominance before anyone's even had their tea. And if she has a better opening line than you?" "She won't. I've been rehearsing. She's had, at most, 90 seconds of warning, assuming Sora's already told her we're coming, which, given the household's information infrastructure, is a near certainty." "For what it's worth," Mr. K said, entirely deadpan, "I give this confrontation a 40% success rate." "That's oddly specific." "I keep files, Isabella. I have a system." "Of course you do. Of course the serious one has a spreadsheet for how badly I'm about to embarrass myself." The aunt looked up from her tea, took one glance at the ledger, and, to Isabella's genuine, immediate frustration, did not so much as flinch. "I found this," Isabella announced, setting it down on the table with a deliberate, dramatic thud, the kind of thud she'd been practicing internally the entire walk over. "In the old wing, behind some boxes nobody thought anyone would ever look behind, which, respectfully, was a mistake because I look behind literally everything. It's practically a hobby." The aunt set her teacup down with the same unbothered precision she'd used for every single interaction since Isabella had arrived, and, infuriatingly, laughed. "You really think," she said, "I was stupid enough to leave a ledger with my own name on it, in my own handwriting, sitting in an unlocked room for 15 years, waiting for someone to eventually stumble across it?" Isabella opened her mouth.
Closed it.
"Oh," she said, deflating slightly. "When you put it like that, it does sound remarkably careless for a woman who apparently threatens people in hallways with the confidence of a professional villain." "I am many things," the aunt said, standing now, circling the table with the slow, controlled grace of a woman who had waited 15 patient years for exactly this conversation and fully intended to enjoy every second of it. "Careless is not one of them. That ledger was planted, recently, by someone who wanted precisely this, you finding it, marching in here with it under your arm, feeling very clever and accusing me in front of witnesses, so that whoever actually did this could keep hiding comfortably behind my reputation for one more year." "To be fair," Isabella said weakly, "the marching in here confident part was pretty well executed. I want that on the record. I don't regret the entrance. Your entrance was very dramatic. I'll give you that. Genuinely, if this family gave out awards, you have one for presentation alone. See, that's the kind of validation I need right now, thank you." "You are, however, entirely wrong about the conclusion, which somewhat undercuts the presentation." "Yes, I'm gathering that. It's a rough morning for my whole brand." Mr. K's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "That's a convenient explanation." "It's the true explanation, which occasionally happens to also be convenient, much to everyone's collective disappointment," the aunt said crisply. "Check the ink if you don't believe me. That ledger is 15 years old on the paper and roughly 6 months old in the ink. I had it authenticated the moment Sora told me you two had been snooping in the old wing. I've known about that ledger for exactly as long as you have, and I've spent every single day since wondering who was patient enough and cruel enough to plant it there and wait." The room went very quiet. Isabella looked down at the ledger, at the careful, damning handwriting, and felt the entire triumphant shape of her morning quietly collapse in on itself. "So, if it wasn't you," she said slowly, "then who wants me to think it was you?" "That The aunt said, sitting back down, suddenly looking every one of her 15 exhausting years older than she had a moment ago, is the only question in this entire house that's ever actually mattered. And I've spent a very long time being far too afraid to ask it directly because the answer, whoever it turns out to be, is someone who has been sitting at our dinner table this entire time, smiling, passing the rice, asking after everyone's health, while quietly making sure nobody ever looked too closely at the one thing that actually happened that night. That's genuinely one of the creepiest sentences anyone said to me this week, and this week has included a bloodstain and a forged ledger, so that's a very high bar to clear. I've had 15 years to perfect creepy sentences. It's practically a hobby at this point. You should meet Mr. K. He'd approve. He's got a whole room dedicated to the aesthetic. I'm aware of Mr. K's room. I funded the filing cabinets. You funded? Wait, you knew about this the whole time? I knew he needed somewhere to put his suspicion where it wouldn't upset the rest of the household. Call it Aunt Ly generosity. Or call it wanting the evidence gathered somewhere I could keep an eye on it without technically doing the gathering myself. Either interpretation is accurate. That's either extremely clever or extremely lazy, and I genuinely cannot decide which. In my experience, the aunt said, allowing herself the faintest, weary smile, the two are rarely mutually exclusive. Isabella sat down slowly across from her, all the earlier bravado gone, replaced by something far more sober. Then I guess, she said, we're not done digging after all. No, the aunt agreed, and for the first time since Isabella had arrived in this house, something that looked almost like relief crossed her face, the particular relief of a woman who had spent 15 years carrying a secret entirely alone and had just, however reluctantly, gained company in the misery. I don't suppose we are. Mr. K, still standing near the doorway, allowed himself the smallest, driest almost smile. Welcome to the filing cabinet, Isabella. Population, growing. If this is the part where I get recruited into a secret family investigation unit, Isabella said, some of her spark finally returning, I want a title. Something with authority. Chief Interrogation Officer, maybe. I've clearly earned it at this point. I've broken into a locked wing, survived 2 threats, and successfully accused an innocent aunt within the same calendar week. I'll consider it, the aunt said dryly. Once you actually catch someone. Bold of you to assume I won't. I've got momentum now. Momentum and mild caffeine dependency. It's a powerful combination. Word of the temporary truce spread through the household with the speed of all bad news and most good gossip, and by the time Isabella made it down for lunch, she found the entire staff looking at her with a newfound, wary respect, as though she'd survived some kind of trial by combat rather than simply had tea with an aunt who no longer wanted her dead. You accused her to her face, a cousin said, sidling up beside her at the buffet table with the breathless energy of a man who had clearly been waiting all morning for someone to gossip with. With a ledger. In her own sitting room. I did. It went about as well as you'd imagine, which is to say, not well, but educational. Nobody's ever done that. Not once. Not in 15 years. That's because nobody else here has my particular combination of stubbornness and a very high tolerance for public embarrassment, Isabella said, loading her plate with far more food than the situation strictly called for, mostly out of stress. It's a rare skill set. I should really put it on a business card. Is it true a 4th one showed up? Another. The cousin lowered his voice to a scandalized whisper, glancing around like the walls themselves might be listening. Another personality. You heard about that already? I only found out myself last night. Sora told Byung-ho. Byung-ho told the gardener. The gardener told literally everyone including the mailman. There's an actual mailman? In this economy? I assumed everything just teleported in via helicopter. There's a mailman. He's very nice. He also apparently now knows more about my cousin's medical history than most of the family does, which tells you everything you need to know about how information travels in this house. Isabella laughed despite herself, despite the exhaustion, despite the fact that somewhere upstairs a 4th stranger wearing her husband's face had told her, quite plainly, that her marriage might be a trap designed to get her killed. Well, tell the mailman I said hello. He sounds like the only reliable source of information in this entire operation. I'll pass that along. He'll be thrilled. Nobody ever acknowledges the mailman. See, that's exactly the kind of oversight that leads to secret ledgers and 15-year cover-ups. This family really needs to work on including more people in the loop. Start small.
Start with the mailman.
Build from there. Later that night, restless again, Isabella found herself back in her room. The ledger, released reluctantly by the aunt for further review, meaning further nervous rereading by Isabella alone, spread open across her lap when she heard the door behind her shift open softly. "You should be asleep," Min-jae said, standing in the doorway, still fully dressed despite the hour, looking like a man who hadn't so much as attempted sleep himself. "You should see the things I found today." Sleep felt optional by comparison. She patted the space beside her on the bed, and after a moment's visible hesitation, he crossed the room and sat. "My aunt told me everything," he said quietly. "The ledger.
The forgery.
All of it. I'm sorry. I really did think I had it for a second. I had the whole speech prepared and everything. It was very satisfying right up until it collapsed. I even had a follow-up speech ready in case the first one landed too well and I needed to soften the blow."
2 speeches, Min-jae.
"I came prepared for victory on multiple fronts. Don't apologize." He turned to look at her, something steady and unfamiliar in his expression, warmer than the careful company man mask he usually wore. "You found more in 4 days than this family managed in 15 years. I don't think anyone's ever actually tried this hard before. I think we all just got very good at learning to live around the hole instead of filling it in." "Well," Isabella said, closing the ledger and setting it carefully aside, "I've never been very good at living around things. Ask my landlord. Ask several former employers. I fill holes in whether people ask me to or not. It's not always a positive trait. I once reorganized an entire office's filing system over a weekend because the alphabetization was, and I quote my own internal monologue at the time, an assault on basic human dignity." "Were you fired?" "I was thanked, actually, extensively, by everyone except the one man whose system I dismantled, who is still, to this day, not forgiven me. I consider it a net win." "That tracks. Everything about me tracks, Min-jae. That's the whole appeal. I'm wildly, aggressively consistent. You just haven't caught up to the pattern yet." He laughed, a real laugh this time, low and unguarded, and for a moment, sitting there in the quiet, absurd luxury of that enormous bedroom, none of the house's ghosts felt quite as loud. Then, mid-laugh, everything changed. His shoulders dropped, not into June's loose, mischievous slouch, not into Daniel's soft, unhurried calm, but into something else entirely, stiller, colder, more alert, like a man waking suddenly from a very long sleep in the middle of a room he didn't recognize. Isabella's stomach dropped instantly. "Okay, new one. I can tell. You've got a whole different energy going on right now, and not the fun kind." He looked at her, and there was something in his eyes she hadn't seen from any of the others. Not mischief, not gentleness, not even Mr. K's weary precision, but something closer to urgency, closer to fear. "You weren't supposed to find that," he said. Isabella went very still. "Find what?" He glanced toward the door, quick and instinctive, the way a man checks an exit before he says something dangerous. "Your marriage." "I'm sorry, what?" He leaned in, voice dropping to barely above a whisper, and every trace of humor Isabella had been building all evening evaporated at once. "They didn't bring you here because they wanted you to marry him." "Then why?" "They brought you here," he said, and his hand found hers, gripping tight, urgent, "because they needed you to die." The room seemed to tilt. "Okay," Isabella said, voice unsteady for the first time since she'd arrived in this house. "I need you, whoever you are right now, to expand on that sentence immediately, because that is, quite genuinely, the single worst sentence anyone has said to me in my entire life, and I once got told my flight was overbooked by 17 seats, which I considered, at the time, a personal low." "There isn't time. There is always time for context, sir. I don't care what crisis we're in. I operate on context. It's load-bearing for my entire personality." "Isabella."
"Who is they?" Give me one name.
1. I promise I'll be very calm about it. I have an excellent poker face when properly motivated. He glanced at the door again. Faster this time, more afraid. I don't have long. None of us get long. Not when it's this close to the surface. Just be careful who you trust in this house. Be careful who pours your tea. Be careful who smiles the widest. That describes literally everyone I've met so far. That's not narrowing it down even slightly. That's just a general life philosophy at this point. But he didn't answer. His grip loosened. His shoulders shifted again, resettling into that familiar, rigid, controlled line, and when he blinked at her next, all the urgency had drained straight out of his face, replaced by pure, blinking confusion. "Why are you crying?" Min-jae said softly, reaching up, genuinely startled, to brush a tear from her cheek she hadn't even realized had fallen. Isabella stared at him, heart pounding so loudly she could hear it in her own ears. "You don't remember that either, do you?" "Remember what?" "We were just talking about the ledger." "We were absolutely not just talking about the ledger. Min-jae, a completely new person, just showed up, told me this whole marriage might be a setup to get me killed, and vanished before I could get a single follow-up question in, which, frankly, given how thorough I've been with everyone else, is deeply unsatisfying customer service." He looked at her, utterly lost, utterly sincere. "I don't know who that was." Isabella's hands were still shaking. She grabbed her phone off the nightstand and dialed June's number first, the number June himself had insisted, mid-dinner, days ago, that she save under the fun one, purely so she could tell the difference on caller ID, a joke that had felt hilarious at the time and felt, right now, unbearably distant. No answer. She tried Daniel next, saved, at his own quiet insistence under sketchy, a pun he delivered so deadpan she'd nearly missed that it was a joke at all. Nothing. She tried Mr. K, saved simply as the filing cabinet, the number he'd given her that very afternoon along with strict instructions to only use it in an actual emergency, which this, she felt fairly confident, now qualified as. Nothing. Not even a ring. "This is insane," she muttered, scrolling back through the contact list like sheer repetition might change the outcome. "I have 3 separate numbers for the same phone, and none of them are picking up. This is the worst customer service I have ever experienced from a haunted house, and I once got left on hold for 90 minutes trying to cancel a gym membership." "That's not possible," Min-jae said, and for the first time all night, real fear cracked openly across his face, no mask left to hide behind it all. We're the same person, Isabella. They don't have separate phones, they just answer mine. That's how it's always." He stopped, looked down at his own hands like he was seeing them for the first time, looked back up at her, something new and terrified dawning in his eyes. "Did you marry me because you wanted to?" Isabella asked quietly, the question arriving before she'd fully decided to ask it, the words hanging there in the sudden, heavy silence of the room. Min-jae opened his mouth, closed it. For a man who had spent his entire life keeping every answer polished and ready, he had, for the very first time since she'd met him, absolutely nothing prepared to say. Isabella wiped her face, straightened her shoulders, and did the only thing she'd ever known how to do when the ground shifted underneath her. She stood up, chin high, spine straight, every ounce of her earlier fear folding itself carefully back down into something sharper, more useful. "Okay," she said, quiet but steady, the words landing in that enormous, ridiculous, haunted bedroom like a door closing and another one opening at the exact same time. "Then I guess we're going to find out who married me." A soft knock landed at the door before either of them could say anything else, and Sora's voice came through, hesitant and small. "Ma'am? Sir? I thought I heard shouting. Is everything all right?" Isabella looked at Min-jae. Min-jae looked at Isabella. Neither of them had the faintest idea how to summarize the last 10 minutes into anything resembling a normal household disturbance. "Everything's fine," Isabella called back, voice remarkably steady given the circumstances. "Just a difference of opinion. Marital. Very ordinary. Nothing to see here." There was a pause on the other side of the door, the particular pause of a woman deciding whether to believe a sentence she clearly did not believe at all. I only handle the kitchen and the laundry, ma'am, Sora said finally, faintly, and retreated down the hallway, footsteps fading fast, leaving the two of them alone again in the wreckage of everything Noah had just said. She's going to tell the whole house by breakfast, Min-jae said. Good, Isabella said, and for the first time since the words "they needed you to die" had left a stranger's mouth wearing her husband's face, something like her old fire flickered back into her eyes. Let her. I'm done being quiet in this house. If somebody wants me dead, they're going to have to do it loudly in front of witnesses because I am never, under any circumstances, going down without an audience. Isabella's phone buzzed on the nightstand before he could answer, and she nearly jumped out of her skin. She grabbed it, expecting June, expecting anyone with a pulse and an explanation. It was a text. No name attached. Just a number she didn't recognize. Asterisk, he told you the truth. Get out of that room. Now. Asterisk. Min-jae. Her voice had gone very quiet. She turned the screen toward him. Somebody just texted me. Somebody who isn't in your phone. He stared at the message, then at her, all the color draining out of his face at once. Isabella, that's not one of our numbers. That's not June's. That's not Daniel's. That's not Mr. K's. I know all of them. I've had those numbers memorized since I was old enough to have a phone. Then who? The lights in the hallway outside flickered once. Just once, brief and sudden, and went still again. Isabella looked at the door. Looked at Min-jae. Looked back at the message glowing on her screen, the cursor still blinking after the final word like it was waiting for her to answer. Well, she said, and even now, even here, some stubborn, unkillable part of her still reached for a joke, because that was simply who she was in a mansion or a war zone or the end of the world itself. I did say I wanted an audience. I just didn't expect them to start texting. Min-jae took the phone gently from her hand, staring at the message like it might rearrange itself into something less frightening if he looked hard enough. Nothing changed. He set it down slowly, and when he looked back up at her, something had shifted in his face. Less fear now, more resolve, like a man finally deciding which side of a war he was on. You're genuinely not afraid, are you? He said quietly. Oh, I'm terrified, Isabella said honestly. I'm just also extremely stubborn, and in my experience, stubborn tends to outlast terrified in the long run. Ask anyone who's ever tried to get me to leave a bad restaurant review unwritten. That's not remotely the same category of danger. It's the same muscle, Min-jae. I refuse to let anything defeat me quietly. If this family, or whoever's behind all of this, wants to win, they're going to have to work for it, because I intend to be extremely, relentlessly annoying about staying alive. I don't know whether that's the most reassuring or the most frightening thing you've said to me all week. Welcome to marrying me. It's usually both at once. You'll get used to it or you won't, but either way I'm not going anywhere. He reached for her hand then, careful, uncertain, like a man testing whether the gesture was still allowed after everything that had just happened, and Isabella let him take it, let herself lean, just slightly, into the one steady thing in a house full of shifting faces and half-told truths. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The house around them had gone unnaturally quiet, the kind of quiet that comes right before something, not after it, and Isabella found herself listening to it the way she'd learned to listen to markets back home right before they turned. A held breath, a pause with weight to it. Whatever happens next, she said finally, quietly, I need you to know I don't regret any of it. Not the suitcase, not the rules I broke, not one single argument. If this is a trap, it's the most interesting trap I've ever walked into, and I fully intend to walk back out of it on my own terms. Min-jae looked at her for a long moment, something unspoken and enormous passing between them in the dark, and then, very softly, he laughed, not June's bright, restless laugh, not the polished, careful sound he usually allowed himself in company, but something smaller and realer than either. You are, without question, he said, the worst possible person to have married into this family. And somehow, I think you might also be the only reason any of us make it out the other side. Careful, Isabella said, the ghost of her usual grin finally returning despite everything. That's dangerously close to a compliment. I'm going to need you to be more careful with those, Min-jae. My ego doesn't have room to expand any further in this house. The halls are already crowded enough as it is. Outside the window, far below in the dark garden, that same light flicked on in the old wing. Not for 4 seconds this time, but longer, steadier, like whoever was up there had finally stopped hiding and started, very deliberately, watching back. See you in the next one.
Bye for now.